good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Let's get started with a glimpse of today's highlights. The OECD has cut its growth outlook for Korea this year, saying the country has more room for expansionary fiscal and monetary measures. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. Koreans more actively used their credit and debit cards abroad than here in the country during a 4-day holiday earlier this month. These stories and more coming right up. But first, a number of people here in Korea are planning to take legal action against Nissan following revelations that suggest the Japanese automaker cheated on emissions tests. But Nissan disputes the accusations. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
Korean owners of the Nissan SUV caught up in an emissions cheating scandal reportedly will prepare to take legal action. According to Korean law firm Padin, it is seeking to gather local Nissan Qashqai owners to file a class action lawsuit against Nissan Korea as well as local dealers.
The lawsuit will seek to cancel the contract for fraud and demand a full refund of the purchase price. For plaintiffs that wish to keep the car, it will ask for a recall, a deduction of the vehicle price, and compensation for manipulating performance and fuel efficiency.
This comes a day after Korea's Environment Ministry accused Nissan of using a cheat device to manipulate emissions tests. The ministry found the Qashqai emitted over 20 times more nitrogenous compounds than the standard, while 19 other models tested discharged around 1 to 10 times the standard. The ministry will order a recall of the Nissan vehicles, fine Nissan Korea $280,000 and suspend local sales of the SUV. In response, Nissan Korea expressed regret for stirring up concern, but denied the allegations. On its website, it said the company does its best to meet strict regulations in all markets it has entered. Nissan also asserted that it has not and does not employ illegal defeat or cheat devices in any of its cars, adding it will cooperate with the Environment Ministry to resolve the issue. More than 800 Nissan Qashqai have been sold in Korea from November through last week. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Most economists believe a June rate hike by the U.S. Federal Reserve is off the table. But the Richmond Fed president says the case for raising rates is pretty strong. He points to improvements in the labor market and consumer prices. Our Oh Soo-young has the details.
Jeffrey Lacker, president of the Federal Reserve of Richmond, says a rate hike at the next month's Fed meeting may be on the cards. In an interview with the Washington Post, Lacker pointed out that despite concerns, inflation is moving toward the Fed's target of 2%, and the downside risks at the start of the year have dissipated. He noted that the labour market has improved, emphasising the recent wage inflation. While unemployment remained at 5% in April, average hourly wages rose by 2.5%. Lacker also expressed concern that by not raising rates, the Fed might be falling behind the curve as the economy strengthens. Investors believe that Fed will stand pat on rates at next month's meeting, citing the slowdown in the broader global economy and the recent turmoil in financial markets. Due to widespread uncertainties, the Fed has kept interest rates between 0.25% and 0.5% since December. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
Just yesterday, the OECD lowered Korea's growth outlook for this year to the 2% range, saying that the economy faces a number of risks, including an aging population and falling exports. And to talk with us more about this, Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
All right, so how much weight does this OECD report carry in terms of assessing the Korean economy as a whole?
Well, the OECD economic survey for Korea is published every year. It's published sort of in a partnership. There's a OECD representative who's stationed in Korea, so he provides the Korean perspective, Korean data, and then it's written in conjunction with theoretical teams who are based in OECD headquarters in Paris. So it's actually a very comprehensive view of what's happened in Korea, economic policy and economic statistics in the last 8 to 12 months. And they look at it from the point of view of various theoretical framework that either OECD has developed or OECD is currently engaged in. So it's very comprehensive, and it provides a view of Korea from a non-Korean point of view, so that's, I think, very useful. There's other reports which are almost like this. WTO has a trade policy review survey paper, but that only comes out every 4 years. There's some private organizations which provide information like this, but they're private organizations, whereas the OECD is a sort of a public organization. It's a partnership of governments. And and because they're partnership of governments, they try to have some kind of a common basis for analysis, as well as they try to put everything in objective numbers. So in that sense, it's very useful. And also, it's not quite the Korean point of view. They do get input from the Korean government, but because they're a group of nations, sort of an economic club, they have to consider the point of view of other countries as well. So from a Korean point of view, maybe they don't consider politics, domestic politics enough. Maybe there's more pro-market than Korea tends to be. But because of that, I think it's a very useful document.
All right, and one thing to note from that report is that the OECD has cut Korea's growth outlook for this year to 2.7%, which is a 0.4 percentage point cut from its previous outlook. What can we make of this?
Okay, well, they made that previous projection in November, and if you remember, back then, most international projections were made around the low 3% range. And then at the beginning of the year, those foreign organizations as well as domestic organizations lowered their projections. So I think this is roughly in line with that.
All right. Well, the OECD has suggested expansionary fiscal policies as one of the ways to tackle low growth for Korea. Does the government, though, have enough room to provide more support to drive up such growth?
Okay, well, this is where that difference of point of view becomes very important. If you talk with Koreans, we're so afraid about our debt load and our aging population demographics for the future. Well, if you look at it from the OECD's point of view, we're actually not doing that bad. If you look at the OECD averages, then our debt to GDP ratio is on the very low side. And our government deficit is also on the very low side. So from the OECD's point of view, in comparison with other OECD countries, we actually seem to have a lot of room for fiscal policy.
And now, the OECD also noted that the Bank of Korea could cut its policy rate because inflation remains below the 2% target. What's your opinion on this?
Okay, well, in the same report, they also mentioned that the core inflation without fresh food, without oil and fuels, is 2.2%, which is very close to Bank of Korea's target. So I think while they did recommend that the lowering the interest rate is a possibility, they didn't advocate it as strongly as fiscal policy. And this year, well, I think this year we're going to see some increase in just regular inflation, CPI inflation as well, because throughout the whole year, the price of food has been rising. So I think, at least from their report, I think they're more enthusiastic about fiscal policy than monetary policy, even though they do advocate some perhaps more lowering of the interest rate.
Now, it talked about Korea's foreign exchange policy as well, and it actually pointed out that Korea needs to establish or sign more currency swap deals with other countries. Do you agree with this?
Yes. Well, we have a lot of international reserves because we're afraid of possibility of financial crisis. Swap does basically the same thing as a reserve because it guarantees a flow of dollars. Now, the swaps we have signed so far is usually with non-dollar countries. So while we do receive some dollars, we also receive other currencies which may not be as useful. Also, some of the swaps, we're also obligated to give swaps.
Right.
And countries really do not want to give swaps because that means they're printing money to give to other countries which may not spend it responsibly. What we I think what we really need is swap with the U.S. Fed.
Okay.
In that case, we can actually reduce our international reserves. But in 2008, the U.S. Fed was really reluctant about giving swaps to other countries, including Korea. So until then, we're probably going to have to maintain a high level of reserves.
All right. Well, what are some other things from this OECD report that we should keep a close eye on from here on out?
Okay, well, if you look at the report, they actually spent more time talking about structural problems than macroeconomic problems. And the two issues that they spent a lot of pages on is labor productivity and labor flexibility. And they do think that a lot of the elements are tied. Korea has been suffering a very low productivity problem, especially in the services. And if you have low productivity, you're going to have low wages.
Right.
And that's partially a problem that leads to income disparity and the poverty for the old and the unemployment among the young. And then they also mentioned labor inflexibility. That leads to, again, the dual labor market problem. And because we have a lot of labor regulations, that makes people reluctant to hire new workers, whether they be young or old.
Right.
So the report mentions that Korean firms tend to give people more overtime than hire new workers. So they do recommend a lot of changes there. But while they do acknowledge that there are political problems, as I mentioned before, they don't take that much emphasis on Korean political problems. So that's an interesting, I think, document on what could happen if Korea got beyond its political problems and got its reforms in order.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
Amid ongoing restructuring efforts, the valuation of order backlogs of Korea's so-called Big Three shipbuilders has plunged by over $22 billion over the last 2 years. According to a report by Hana Institute of Finance, combined order backlogs of Hyundai Heavy Industries, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, and Samsung Heavy Industries came to about $96 billion as of the first quarter of this year. Now, this is down 18.6% compared to the end of 2013. And Daewoo has the largest backlog worth $36.8 billion, while Hyundai's fell by the largest margin of 27.3% over the cited period. The extended dip is attributed to excess supply worldwide and low oil prices. Talking about oil futures hit a 6-month high on Monday on worries about potential global supply shortages. On the New York Mercantile Exchange, West Texas Intermediate futures rose $1.51, or 3.3% to end at $47.72, after reaching a 6-month high of $47.85. Brent crude futures settled at just under $49 a barrel, up 2.4%. This comes amid worries about a potential global supply shortfall. And according to Goldman Sachs, recent outages from producers such as Canada and Nigeria have brought the oil market from near full storage levels to a deficit much earlier than expected. The country saw some positive results from the 4-day extended holiday early this month, with a noticeable bump in card spending. But what's also worth noting is the growth in purchases put on plastic overseas. Our Lee Joo-young has more.
It seemed the government's designation of May 6 as a temporary holiday to boost domestic demand was on track to produce the desired effects. According to Korea's largest credit card company, KB Kookmin, Koreans spent roughly $633 million within the country during the 4-day extended holiday. This is about 5% more than the amount spent last year when it also gave people an extra day off. But looking at the growth of card spending overseas, a different story emerges. Despite Koreans having spent around $5.4 million abroad, a fraction of domestic consumption, compared to last year, figures jumped by 11%. Spending grew the most in the United Arab Emirates by 73%, followed by Japan at about 44% and Singapore. By sector, KB says Koreans spent roughly 40% more at duty-free stores compared to last year, reflecting higher demand for tax-free outlets as people headed abroad.
The temporary holiday helped boost domestic demand a lot, but in order to maximize the effect, we need to find ways to make foreigners spend more in Korea.
Experts say growth in overseas card spending could have been even more drastic had the government announced a temporary holiday any earlier than the one-week notice it offered. They add more practical measures need to be put in place, like increasing facilities and boosting price competitiveness in order to encourage people to spend within the country. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that brings us to the end, but we'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place for your Business Daily, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.